Okay, so just so you know, we're being recorded and I don't want to touch this. I don't want to mess it up. Okay. There. So welcome to River Talks. And if we encourage questions, so if you have a question that comes up during Mr. Hurley's talk, we have some time at the end for that. And also online, you can put your question into the chat. And Ryan with the Reserve is our tech support. So this series is hosted by Wisconsin Sea Grant and the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. And let's see, what else do I have to say? I guess now it's Moira's turn. Moira Harrington is the communications coordinator with Wisconsin Sea Grant, and you were going to intro the speakers, right? Well, are you going to intro Jim, or should I intro Jim? Okay, I did not understand that because I think of him as a speaker. So, so that's good to know. Jim Hurley.
I'm here.
Is here. He drove up from Madison today along with Moira and Melissa, and he has been our. You can tell people about yourself, but we think he's a great director. He's been our director for you're the third one, right? And he will be talking about Sea Grant F50, looking back and moving forward.
Thanks, Marie. And thank you all. It's great to be standing in front of 3D people. And it's also great to have everybody online joining us. It's just fun to be back and giving a face-to-face talk, and we've missed it for the last few years. It's also an honor to come up here and give a talk in the estuary, and as someone who was on some of the committees that helped put the NEAR together. It's really neat to be in this place and to see such a successful organization. So thank you too for inviting me up here. I'm also just darn proud to be able to give this talk and to be a part of an organization that I have so much respect for, and that's surrounded by so many great people. It's just a great position to be in. And then in putting this talk together, it gave me a chance it was a bit of a challenge to go back and reflect on some of the things that led to where we are today, and reading through some old reports. And I hope I can share some of those things with you today about Sea Grant. So if you've been to our conference room in Madison, you'll see this great plaque. And the plaque was the one that said that that the University of Wisconsin is designated as Sea Grant College. And that happened in October of 1972. So we're in our 50-year anniversary. But actually, Sea Grant has had a series of 50th anniversaries over the last few years. And I'm going to touch on some of them that I think is important or are important. 1966, that was at the top of the plaque. That was the year of the authorization of the National Sea Grant College Program. So we, as 34 Sea Grant organizations, had a Sea Grant Week in 2016 where we celebrated that. And many of the other programs are saying, well, when should we celebrate our actual 50th? And that's why the series of 50th anniversaries come along. So in effect, that was the passing of the Constitution, and then it was all these different steps for statehood. So the work of Sea Grant actually began in 1968. So we could have celebrated that a few years back. And that's when the first funding were awarded. And it was back in the day that Sea Grant was part of the National Science Foundation. And that's when a number of programs got their first funding. We could have celebrated back in 2020. We achieved what's known as institute status at that time. It's a progression towards statehood, I guess. And we achieved institute status. We could have done that. NOAA was really, they were all set to have big celebrations for 2020 for their 50th anniversary, because they came in 1970, a little bit more subdued because of the effects of the pandemic on any celebration in 2020. Some of our other friends in universities were celebrating their 50th on last year in 2021, because that's when the first 4 colleges or first 4 universities received what we call Sea Grant college status. There's one Sea Grant program per state that achieves college status. So that's Oregon, Rhode Island. Rhode Island, we'll see. We'll come back in a second. That's going to be pretty important. Texas A&M. Remember the A and M in that, and then the other, the W, the University of Washington. And so then along came 1972, and that was when we became an official Sea Grant college, along with our friends from Hawaii. I've been seeing a number of other people celebrating their 50th anniversary in some of the other programs. I think they're celebrating their institute status or the first grants or whatever. But we're really into this 50th thing, and it gives us a chance to look ahead and look back. But there's also one more anniversary that we probably should have celebrated, and that was back in the 50th in 2013. We're getting close to the 60th anniversary of this important period, or this important time. This is Athelstan Spillhouse. For those of you who don't know him, and I'll show you in a second, there's a lot to him. He's an amazing guy. So University of Minnesota, he was an oceanographer. He actually invented the first backhoe thermograph. Really cool. When he was at MIT, came up here. But in an AFS meeting in September of 1963, he asked the question in a general speech about what could we do, what we did for the land a century ago, and why not have Sea Grant colleges? So what that refers to is land grant. So if you think of remember the A&M the Texas A&M, the land grant process that established the schools of engineering, or agriculture and mechanics, actually A&M, which now today is agriculture and engineering. That was the model that Spillhouse wanted to put for the oceans, for the marine areas, for the coastal areas. So when you see the word grant in Sea Grant, it should be akin to land grant colleges. And Spillhouse is an amazing person. And I can tell you, because I have a prop here too. And and we have a famous author sitting in the back room, and that's Sharon Moan, who put together this book for the 50th anniversary of the 50th of the Sea Grant Reauthorization Act of 1966. A great story about, or a great text about Athelstan Spillhouse. All of the many things he did. He did comic strips. He did he was a futurist, did a futuristic comic strip that JFK used to read and used to like, and just a smart guy, a dreamer, an inventor. So with tomorrow in mind, that talks a lot about Spillhouse and his many visions of what we should or we could possibly do with Sea Grant. So that whole concept was further sold to the federal government. And for those of you who've been to Capitol Hill, you know how things work with establishing programs. You need some authorization language in order to get spending for a particular program. And this is the original, it's actually a revision of the October 15th, 1966 Sea Grant Act, which I said earlier. But what was interesting is that if you look at what's in the original page of authorization, the Great Lakes are mentioned 7 times during that act. So what I like to do is, in addition to Senator Claiborne Pell, who sponsored this, Pell, amazing guy when you think about all he's done for education, Pell grants, and he was the father of this Sea Grant Act. We had a couple of Wisconsin senators that were pretty important back then too, that helped pass this legislation through. So when I see that the Great Lakes are mentioned so many times, it took a lot to get it in there. but it was really important in establishing Great Lakes programs. So the 8 programs that we now have in the Great Lakes. And keep that in mind, that authorization, that was our original language, and then every so often it gets updated, because that will come back into play a little bit later on. But in the original language, the 1966 authorization talked about Sea Grant as an investment in a strong program of integrated research, education, extension, training, tech transfer, public service. That was all part of this program, that it was a program that was based at universities, but really engaged the public in as many ways as it could. And if you look at what today's mission is and what our overall mission for Sea Grant is, it is that enhancing the practical use and conservation of Great Lakes resources. Words like sustainable economy in there and government, well, NOAA now, where Sea Grant is part of the Department of Commerce. Sustainable economy is a little important when you're in an agency like that, and that we accomplish this through research, extension, and education. So the pillars of a Sea Grant program. What made it really great to have a program at the University of Wisconsin, and I always show this when we have a review of our program and such. And there are two sort of historical photos here that are pretty important, and historical concepts. If you ever have to go to a meeting at the chancellor's office or at my boss, the vice chancellor for research office, you have to climb Bascom Hill. And sometimes it's a pain in the warmer weather, but you get up to the top of Bascom Hall, there's a plaque that sits right there. And I catch my breath there, but I try to read it every time that I do go up there. And that's the plaque from the class of 1910. It's called our sifting and winnowing plaque. That the great University of Wisconsin should forever encourage, that on a continual and fearless sifting and winnowing from which alone the truth can be found. It's really profound type of statement. There's a number of different interpretations in this, but it really shows what our research is, that sifting and winnowing and change and finding the truth, or at least heading towards the truth. Then the other one is President Charles Van Hise, and this is the concept that is what's known as the Wisconsin idea. And this is over 100 years old, 115 years old. And basically, what Van Hise said was that the borders of the university should be the borders of the state, or people have interpreted it to the borders of the state and beyond. Basically, that the mission of our university should be serving the students or serving the citizens of the state and beyond. So it's an instant connection to the extension mission that we have. It also helps feed our research in that we do stakeholder-based research at Sea Grant. So these two pictures I think are fairly important in it, and it's also why when Sea Grant got started in Wisconsin, that the university was really anxious to provide the match and support what we needed for a program, because this was one of those matching programs, and they still serve it or support it fairly strongly with our match. So I want to take a little bit of time just to talk about some of the people that helped form what Sea Grant is today, some of the concepts they had, and how things play in today. Our first director was Bob Ragotzkie, amazing guy. He passed away late last year. We're hoping he would be here to celebrate our 50th anniversary, because he was the one that went through all of those steps to get Sea Grant statehood for Wisconsin. He was a B-24 fighter pilot. He stopped. He was at college at Rutgers and joined joined the military. Then went back to Rutgers, got his degree, got his PhD at UW-Madison. But then went down to Sapelo Island in Georgia, became their first director of their Marine Institute. That coupling with Wisconsin, it's still strong today. We have classes that go down to Sapelo Island and do research in our oceanography program because of what Bob had done. He was with the Department of Meteorology, which is now Atmospheric and Ocean Sciences. And he was the guy that pulled everything together from 1966, became what we call a principal investigator of the first project, then the director of the institutional program, and then he was the first official director. And Bob was really a great guy, and really creative. When I look at what they put into the National Science Foundation for the original grant to establish Sea Grant in the state, he was already thinking in thematic areas. And this is just, it sort of pulls apart the eutrophication, but think about where we were back in 1967. But all of these different concepts in here, and the people that were in universities from across Wisconsin that put this proposal together. Hassler was in here, and I think Magnuson was in here. Hilsenhoff was in here on insect ecology. But they're actually some of the same things we're studying 50 years later, right? That we may not have had all the questions to it, or the answers to it. Secondly, they talked about Lake Superior circulation. Bob was thinking in oceanographic terms about circulation in Lake Superior at the time and how that affected pollution and pollution distribution. And then he also was doing climate work, or also had a group of climate. So it's really cool to see that, this original proposal that is this is almost 67, so 55 years old, was really creative in thinking about how to pull emerging issues together. But when you went into an individual thing like eutrophication, it just put teams together of people to address those problems. The other thing that Bob did was that he set up what at the time was called Marine Advisory Services, now we call Sea Grant Extension. Bob's philosophy in hiring people to work for advisory services is that you hired specialists first, that you got the best specialists that you could that really knew the science to address the Wisconsin coastal needs, more so than someone that could cover multiple issues in many different places. So he took the Sea Grant specialist model and did it, and originally did fisheries and water safety and aquaculture even back then. Working directly with communities. I love the white belt in that picture. I'll have to get that one. And then over on the left is Phil Keeler. He was our first coastal engineer. And engineering has always been a strength of the Wisconsin program. It continues to be a strength of the Wisconsin program, and goodness, over the last few years, even more so. So, but Bob was the one that set up that sort of concept in Marine Advisory Services, or Sea Grant Extension. And I'll tell you, to this day, any hire made in our extension group is a strategic hire. He also, by the time he went to institute status, he had sub-programs. Again, thinking about pulling things together and pulling people together in groups rather than just a series of a bunch of different projects. That top one we'll get back to in a second. But some of the things that the Marine Resources Program, there were some issues in Green Bay. They were thinking, I think, of mining manganese out of Green Bay around that time, looking at minerals. Put together a group to do that, and ocean mechanics, even socioeconomics back then in the 70s, and pulling it all together. Put together a great education program, and as I said, that concept with advisory services and specials. And the other thing that Bob did, and to this day is the most important part of Sea Grant, is the partnerships and collaboration. There's a lot of white space on that side. I was going to put logos of all of our partners and such. It would look worse than NASCAR, on LSD. There's just so much. There are just so many people in there. So there's no way I'm trying to forget anyone if I'm talking about some of these concepts. It's just that there have always been partners, and when we put together projects, we've always had agency partners and other types of partners. our project. So, and Bob actually recognized that was also the key to Sea Grant success. Moira, we had 230, 240 partners in our last annual report. So, you know, look at the white space and think about all those logos. But when Bob put together a team and a sub program, he really knew how to do that. And I think probably one of the best examples of this is what Sea Grant did in the early days in the lower Fox River and then out into Green Bay. On the left, you can see there's still the algal blooms that occur from the nutrient loading. But what was really important at this time was that was some of the first evidence that the lower Fox River was grossly contaminated with PCBs, and that was one of those areas where Bob knew that the university linkage could be pretty important in understanding PCBs in the lower Fox. There are all sorts of pictures. For those top left-hand corner, that will become someone who's familiar, but put together a team of physical chemists, environmental chemists at the time, the startings of environmental chemistry, to look at all sorts of behavior of these compounds. But the first thing I had to do is figure out ways to measure it. And you start to think about where we are today with issues like PFAS and such. That's where PCBs were at about the start of this back in the early 70s. It led to large projects within Green Bay on sources of PCBs, cycling within the Green Bay ecosystem, and then targeting the Fox River for the contamination of the sediment. And it was also the basis that led to a huge EPA project, which was the Green Bay Fox River study. It was a mass balance where are all the PCBs going? Finding out that sometimes they're going up, sometimes they're being released from the waters of Green Bay into the atmosphere. Really cool study. That in turn then that same type of concept led to the Lake Michigan mass balance study also. So, but again, with something like this, it was partnerships with state and federal agencies, different parts of EPA, different parts of the state government, the DNR, Department of Public Health, and all of those. And so, you know, here we are, almost 2020. So maybe almost 50 years later, and we can see the benefits of investment from back then. It took a while. It took a while to remediate the Fox River. It took a lot of court action in order to do it, but it was successful because of the partnerships that it gained. That it involved some basic research, applied research, and some agencies with a little bit of clout too. So when we talk about you know, this is something that everybody should celebrate, that all of those partners that I didn't mention in that slide, this is really important. But in order to get to that point, you had to have that basic research. You had to have all of that, the food web studies and such. And so that gives you hope for some, you know, for down the line. The other thing that Bob did is had a heck of a communications team at the time. And they established what was known as Earthwatch Radio back in 1972, and that went on until 2007. It was radio. It was the way that public service announcements used to be required of stations. It was ways to get science into the news. It ended, I think, I think it was under the Clinton administration that they pulled back on those rules. But it's really interesting. I had to blow up this piece here. There's the tape, and it says after use, return tape to the address below. So that was the way that we were dealing with things back then. That was communications. Here's your reel-to-reel tape, and that would play on public radio stations and also on commercial radio stations that were required to do public service announcements. So I knew how to get into how to use science communication some really creative ways. And that continues to this day. Made a strong investment in science and communications and into communication staff in Wisconsin Sea Grant. If you move on to our next director, Anders was director for about 20 years. He was actually in one of those earlier pictures, doing some PCB measurements, because he was one of those PIs that first started studying PCBs in the Fox River. He was involved in Sea Grant, well, as I said, at first in 75 as a PI, and then as associate director. Anders was twice president of the Sea Grant Association, and was really influential in what he did there, because the way that Wisconsin Sea Grant had put together different thematic areas and grouping people, Anders was one that really pushed to do that at a national level, to get people in New Jersey Sea Grant that were doing the same thing as Florida Sea Grant and Oregon Sea Grant and Wisconsin, and maybe somewhere else in the Great Lakes, together to talk about similar types of issues, and then try to aggregate the results from that. And it's really a really important part of what he did. He also was a technology nut, and Wisconsin had the first, I don't know if it was a race or not, but was the first website for a Sea Grant program. Also developed a system for submitting proposals, doing reviews, doing all of those, and then really pushing microcontaminants, which was one of his pushing microcontaminants research, continuing, went from PCBs to PBDEs, and now we'll talk about some of the fluorinated compounds. One of the cool things that happened in 1998, though, that Anders was able to engineer was the merging of two programs. And that's our Water Resources Institute together with our Sea Grant Institute. Water Resources Institute funding comes from USGS. Wisconsin has always had a strong Water Resources Institute that looks more at inland waters and groundwater. It runs the Wisconsin Groundwater Research and Monitoring Program. That's what we call this joint solicitation, where every year all of the agencies in Wisconsin that have groundwater in their portfolio come together in one joint solicitation instead of looking for projects separately on their own. And it really has, I think, put Wisconsin as one of the leaders in groundwater research in the country, because of this perpetual funding that went to university, the UW system, to do this sort of work. When you put the two together, you get really powerful coverage on different issues. You get the ability to have communications work on both sides of this, extension work on both sides of it, and embrace those two programs together. And it's been really important for us to have some of that flexibility, especially during different budget times, to have both of these together. So that was a real plus. The other thing that occurred during Anders' term is that the Great Lakes came together as a network better, I think, than any other network in the country. And because we had similar issues, we had programs that were together. This is a map right now of where all of our staff locations are. But we've done things like have regional research competitions, pull together several proposals together, like on a research side, but even more so the extension people that pretty much know everybody else in the entire Great Lakes Basin, and it gives you such a great network, such a community of practice that can interact. The other thing that happened, though, during Anders' time, and you might wonder what all those dots are doing and why Vermont is sitting there as a Sea Grant program. And that's an interesting little story that goes back to reauthorization. We celebrated that reauthorization. So what happens in authorization language is that the wording has changed, maybe some funding levels are changed a little bit, or your ability to spend a little more. So you can see things up here like striking their university, inserting his or her instead of their. Okay, I can go with that. Certain types of striking this paragraph, ending this paragraph. But number 5 was the one that caused a little kerfuffle in the U.S. Because of this Vermont senator who was very powerful at the time and still is, and just in the reauthorization language just said, well, the term Great Lakes includes Lake Champlain, and and so that caused a little bit of a problem with people with Congress people in the Great Lakes, and it was all this the 18 days that it was actually the 6th Great Lake. This was a great quote from Lake Champlain. I propose we rename it Lake Plain Cham. So so we still have it, and later in 1998 the Great Lakes status was rescinded after a few weeks. But the universities in Vermont and New York can still apply for Seagrass funding. So we tend to say we have the 5 Great Lakes and a darn good one in the whole system. But they're all part of it. And the issues in Lake Champlain, we're seeing the same types of issues that we see in the other Great Lakes. But they're just interesting on how certain wording can happen in congressional language. The other thing I think that was really important that happened when Anders was director is that Sea Grant started to really focus on coastal community issues. And I prior to that time, they dabbled in it, but this was some actual funding to go towards issues like working waterfronts and recreation and tourism opportunities. Those weren't some of the issues that were part of this, but it's also that complex interaction between social, economic, environmental values and multiple uses. So we started to turn things a little bit, for something that Bob Ragotzkie, the first director, said, we will not be fish grant. There's a lot of the other coastal states only did fisheries research. We'll not be fish grant. We'll do other types of things. But it wasn't really until there was a coastal community, there was actual funding to go towards coastal community issues. One final thing with Anders is he really loved shipwrecks, and he loved so someone who was part of a shipping family, or he actually worked the docks as a high school student, really saw the value in shipwrecks work and the stories that can be told of that, and that continual investment that Sea Grants put into that. Coastal management has also put funding into shipwrecks research too. Now we have a national marine sanctuary on Lake Michigan coast. There's talk of another one up in this area too. So that's something I think too to be proud of in the course of Sea Grant funding. So by the time I got handed the keys, we pretty much were settled in nationally on some focus areas, and these change a little bit, but these are the main focus areas of Sea Grant, and this is where we try to align our research work and our outreach work under resilient communities and economies, fisheries and aquaculture. Education is under environmental literacy and workforce development, and then healthy coastal ecosystems. Wisconsin traditionally had tons of projects in healthy coastal ecosystems, but we're seeing them spread out a lot more across all of those 4 focus areas. The other thing that we've tried to do is over the last 5 to 10 years is really try to push the concept of actionable science, so that when people think about putting together a project, that they try to involve their stakeholders and try to end up with products that people can use. We encourage PIs to do more science communications with our staff. We ask them to do social science coupling where they can. But the thing is, try to think about the end users. What are you doing? What do you what sort of tool might you produce? And I think that's really important. I know it's really important. The projects that we see the most success for are the ones that started with the end users at the table when a proposal went in, and we're starting to see more of those. And the other thing that I think tried to change a little bit over the past 10 years is that traditionally, what Sea Grant has done is our projects typically that involve graduate students and faculty at our universities to answer those issues. That's great. We still do that. That really is a core to us. The other thing that's been really successful in our program is the Knauss Fellows Program. It's just celebrated 40 years. And what happens is that students or postgraduates go to Washington, D.C., work directly in agencies for a year, or they work on Capitol Hill for a year. And it gets the science up on the Hill. It gets trained ocean coastal scientists in congressional offices and committees, and then in the agencies too. So I think we're up to now we're up to 60 plus positions a year more, I think, or people know Sea Grant because of the Knauss Fellows. So we thought a little bit about this, how successful the Knauss program was, and obviously our graduate student postdocs, and those are all pretty important. But one thing that we've done, and this is Jen Hawkswell has really been the key to making this all work, and she's done a great job. I think you can see the slides basically over on the far side on the left there are the years. But this is our postgraduate fellowship program, and it started really small. It started in 2016, and well, actually, 2016 with a little bit of funding. And what we asked of the coastal management program is that we'd like to do a program where we put talent in your office. What if we pay half, you pay half, and we put together a position? So that's the first one that Adam Beckley, way up in the left side, was. Carolyn Voter, we knew there was a need downtown at the Department of Natural Resources to pull together some of the results of all of that groundwater research that have been funded, and we put that together. Again, we paid half, they paid half, and this is where it's gone. This is where it's gone today. Another really important part of this has also been the establishment of the EPA training grant here in Duluth, and being able to have recognize at least one person there sitting in the room that was part of the training grant that was established to make more opportunities to have people look at different types of careers, that they're not going straight from graduate school. Not everything is going to be a professor. Not everyone's going to go be a professor, but let's get that talent into our different agencies. And this has just grown really well, and it's just from a small investment. I think where we are today, well, if you look at last year on 2021, I think we're still only paying like the equivalent of 1.5 full positions, and that's where we are right now. Because what happens is that the state agencies really like the program, and they'll say, well, next year we'll pay for it all, and it just keeps growing, and it's really been great, and I'm grateful for the people that have been a part of this and have been mentors in this program, and have given people the opportunities that they've had. What's also really nice about the Sea Grant side of the funding is that we named our whole program after Phil Keeler, who was our first engineering extension specialist, and it is that link between the science and the people in all of these positions. So we're really pleased with this, and I think that's a neat way to grow, not just as the graduate student faculty member type of project, but growing out even further. And then I think we've got some really cool programs that are kicking off, that are starting to increase that pipeline, that look at issues like diversity and how they recruit. And one is this the national program. The National Sea Grant program has a heck of a diversity, equity, inclusion work group, and this is to get students, and it is designed for underrepresented groups to highlight in recruitment, have them work directly with Sea Grant outreach people to show them a different way of doing science. And then through funding that we're getting from the state, from the Freshwater Collaborative of Wisconsin, which is all 13 system, and funding together with some Sea Grant investment, we're making all sorts of summer opportunities for research experience for undergraduates, and trying to recruit the way in a different way, add diversity. I couldn't leave without telling the PFAS story, because this is a direct, it's really important because it's partnerships, and it's really an important story that started here with the fire that you folks had a few years back, and some of the responses to that, and where we are right now. But it shows you the importance of collaboration, of working together. And that was when the Husky fire was here, and we got a call from the previous director about hey, we're sampling Newton Creek. You know, should we keep doing that? Should we go out and sample? And it was continually sampled after the fire and after it started. And then afterwards, after all the samples were, it was, well, what could we look for? What should we be looking in? And if you remember, that was, you all remember that live up here, that fire. And they used a lot of AFFF foam on the PFAS firefighting foam to put that fire out. So they monitored, the NEAR monitored and took samples, I don't know how many, the intervals of it, but over the course, and yeah, you could actually see that some were entering the bay. The problem was we didn't have the capacity to do it. We partnered with a private lab in the state. There's only one lab in the state that could do the analyses, that were certified to do the analyses for water in the state. And people knew that had to change. We had some people in our advisory council say, you've got to start, you've got to get into the PFAS game. We had some extra funding, some program development funds that we're able to push the State Laboratory of Hygiene, which is the state's environmental research lab and its public health lab, and to build capacity to analyze for PFAS in water. Amazing individuals up there, really small investment that we made. But by the middle of 2019, they had certified methods, and we're talking like sub-nanogram per liter levels of part per trillion levels of 18 individual PFAS compounds. And they were actually taking rain samples and measuring them in rain samples too. So it was neat to see that come together. Our advisory council told us we should start funding some PFAS research. We did starting in 2020. Remember that fellow thing? Here it is here, that the Department of Health Services said, we would really like someone to come up here and work on establishing PFAS drinking water standards that knows toxicology. Do you have a way to do that? So we found a way to get that position in. At the same time, the training grant was on. EPA was starting to hire up some postdocs. The first one was in early 21. 2 additional came through on the training grant here. We put out another RFP. We actually hired the guy that did the PFAS sampling, or the PFAS toxicology, is now an emerging contaminant specialist with us. And because of what he did, the Department of Health Services in Wisconsin proposed 15 drinking water standards. And now we're funding a couple more. We've got a sensor project, an air water exchange project in PFAS. And now the State Lab of Hygiene has created what they call a Center for PFAS Research. So the seed started here or over there, and it was amazing the way this all came together. And this lab is one of the leaders in analysis of PFAS. So that's cool. Other things that are great. Aquaculture. Wisconsin has had a strong investment in aquaculture. Here's an example of where aquaculture can go. If anybody drives south of Eau Claire in 94 on a dark night and you see a purple glow up on the top of a hill, that's Superior Fresh. It's an aquaculture facility that it's that its effluent is used to grow salad greens. So you can find those at most stores around Wisconsin, and they also grow Atlantic salmon. So it's actually the world's largest hydroponics facility, fish hydroponics facility, and it sits on top of a hill just south of Osseo. But incredible because of funding that some of the research with Stevens Point at their Northern Aquaculture demonstration facility, that they were also a part of it. Yeah, we don't have Earthwatch Radio, but we sure have communications, and we've gone the next step that podcasting is in, that YouTube, Voices of the Coast, that those are the types of things that people want to see. We have blogs. So communication has also changed with the times, and I think that I really feel is ahead of the curve, continues to be ahead of the curve. Moira's got a great staff working with her on issues like that. And we've also had investment in Sea Grant staff in those emerging issues like climate change. Another example of the Wisconsin idea of grassroots Wisconsin types of issues, where was a group like WICI, the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impact, where we have scientists who do downscaled climate modeling, give us the maps and the projections for mid-century and such. And then you have these great teams of people to think about, what does that all mean? How are we going to respond to that? What will those changes mean for tourism and outdoor rec, infrastructure, coastal resilience? So it's really great to see that. And I don't have to tell people here that, these are the take-home message. Climate change is here and now, and will continue to impact Wisconsin. But I just love this image from Door County that was in Wisconsin Watch, and it's a simple thing about lake levels in the Great Lakes, that you can see a pier here to the right. Obviously, it keeps moving back, but a few years ago they had a dredge to get through that area, but now they have to recede. So, and talk about our engineers that have to deal with issues like that in a changing Great Lakes. That should all be familiar to you too. The intensity of storms, the wettest decade that just occurred in Wisconsin, the warmest decade, or the warmest past 2 decades that have occurred in Wisconsin. And how do we respond to this? How do we think about roads that are more resilient, or culverts that are more resilient, that we don't have to keep replacing? And then so many other issues that just keep emerging and continue, that we're still working on in Wisconsin. But I just want to finish up with a couple of points. One of the challenges moving forward is how does our organization really address diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental justice? We did a lot of talking when we were all working from our home offices, getting together as groups and talking about these issues and where are we going to go forward with this. And we're talking about during the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, the Lafayette Square, all of these different things were happening, and it caused us to think and to rethink and continue to think. And one of the things that we've done is that we hired a firm called Equity by Design, EQT by Design, to do what they call an equity audit and look at our operation and ask the types of questions internally on issues of equity and inclusion, from how do we advertise positions, how do we hire, how do we push towards a more diverse group. I mean, there wasn't a lot of diversity in those early pictures as you saw, but there is in both the fellows program and in our undergraduate program too, and making that pipeline work. But the other thing that we had a chance to do when we were all in working from home is that we're actually revised that last strategic plan that we did, and we actually focused on issues that included targeted diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice projects we went out and tried to beat the bushes to try to get those types of projects. We ended up funding 2 education projects targeting underserved communities. And then we're really excited about two projects here. The first one, which you'll all become probably pretty familiar because it will occur on Wisconsin, or the focus of it is Wisconsin Point and Minnesota Point, and that's from Dr. Larson at Platteville. And then we have another intertribal Lake Winnebago connectivity project that's been funded through the Nelson Institute. So I'm glad we're taking these steps. We've got a lot more to do, but we're hoping that we're creating opportunities that we're moving to the pipeline. And I'll just finish with this last one about what has the COVID pandemic taught us about connecting with coastal communities. It is just great to be here and to talk to people face to face again. We can reach a lot more people sometimes on Zoom, but are we really able to listen to them and interact? And that's a real challenge, I think, moving forward for our outreach staff. They've been well connected through Zoom, but how do we go forward? How do we do this? Maybe it is this hybrid that we're doing right now. Maybe this is the way moving forward, but we really have to start to think about where we're going there. So I just wanted to put up, you can find this. I'm not asking you to write down this, but we are in the strategic planning phase again. We're planning now for 2024 to 2028. And we're asking people to give us their ideas on where Sea Grant can go. So you can find this link on our homepage and help us chart our future. There's a lot to keep doing, and that's our webpage, seagrant.wisc.edu. And I figured I'd end up with some pretty views of, well, a lot of them are Lake Superior. So thanks so much for coming. It's been great to be able to talk about this. As you see, I have a bit of a passion for Sea Grant and what it does. So thanks so much. Questions? I can't see the chat. Oh, I do.
Ryan.
Yes, I can. Okay. Okay. No, that's just Ryan stuff on there.
Nope, we don't have anything in the chat at this moment.
Question from the back, Joel.
Okay. I loved your slide on sort of all the emerging issues. It was kind of cluttered and chaotic, which I think it often feels a lot like how we feel dealing with some of these new and emerging issues. So as you think about that strategic plan, how do you build that in, and how do you keep your focus yet also become flexible? Because there'll be another PFAS, right? There's something else that's surprising.
Right. So the question for those online was about with all of the different emerging issues, how do you prioritize and how do you focus? It's a really difficult thing to do, Joel. It just all of these new opportunities that come up are, I mean, our staff, worries about, okay, this is exciting, but what am I going to give up? I mean, if we're going to go in some areas, we're going to have to give up on some others, and that's the difficult part. It's great to have an advisory council like we have too, because we've got 2 levels of advisory councils. One that is more of the overall programmatic advisory council that we get approval for them for when we release our call for proposals, those types of things. And those are more seasoned individuals that have been around. People like Bud Harris and Green Bay that watch all of these types of issues. Val Klump from Milwaukee, to help us try to focus a bit. And then we also have a group that advises our outreach staff too. So each of them have people that are advisors through outreach and education. But that's going to be the key is in order to go in those new areas, what are you going to give up? The funding is limited. And that makes it even more difficult when we have our research panels and figuring out what the next projects will be that will get funded. But we can't be everything to all people, but I think it's also why it's good to have specialists too, because they can help define things a little bit more than if we were from the outreach side, if we were that much broader, that they can help build their programs because of their specialties. You're right, there's a lot on that slide. Moira, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Jim, you're allowed to sit down and catch breath now. So thanks for sticking around with us a little bit. We were trying to do kind of a mashup tonight, right? So Marie, oh, I didn't know we were still recording. Okay.
I just need to see you.
Oh, okay. So we were trying to do a bit of a mashup tonight. Marie and the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Really appreciate it. And I'm sorry. Everyone online, I'm sorry that they put on a great spread tonight. There's some really great food out there too. We appreciate that and being in the special building. But it's been wonderful to have a whole season of river talks, and it was great to end this season with our 50th anniversary celebration. As Jim mentioned many times during his talk, Sea Grant couldn't do the work it does without partners. And when we were putting together this evening, there were so many people. We brainstormed these names, like who else would we want to make sure is in the room? Who else might want to come up and say a few remarks? It was hard to kind of winnow it down, but with your patience and thank you, we're going to invite a few people up to say a few things about our partnership with them and how much we really value working with them. Just a few people. I'm going to bring people up one at a time. First, Jenny Vancicle, President of the Superior City Council. You want to come up and say a few things? Thank you. I guess we have to stay in here.
Should we stop sharing?
Yeah, that's what
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
I am.
Okay,
awful.
okay.
Click stop share. Hey, okay.
Well, I know it's getting late, so I'll be as brief as possible. My name is Jenny Vancicle, Haksai, Wase Tuati, Klinget Athabaskan Sheet, Mekwan Katsariyeh Gajahin. And that means I am from the water. That means I am my mother's raven, and I am of the Frog Clan and Sun House. That part has always stuck with me a little bit because I was raised in a rainforest where it is this weather every single day. 300 days a year it is raining. So I feel very comfortable in this weather. Like you said, I am also the, against all odds, the president of Superior City Council. And I don't mean that because I've been through a lot politically. It just means that I'm not from here. And I think, like a lot of little Native kids, I had a really difficult time understanding where I fit in this world and what my possibilities were in life. And because I was born and raised on an island, water was one of the very first things that I was very aware of in my life. And I'm really thankful to all of the educators and community leaders who would often pull us all out of school and take us down to the beach. And we spent a lot of days playing in the tide pools. And what I didn't realize at the time is that was our school. That was the education. And for a little kid like me who grew up in a lot of turmoil and violence, substance abuse, being near the water was free and it was fun. And I'm just always really thankful for that experience. And there are a lot of people out there just like you and you online who make sure our water is clean and free and accessible. I just want you to know that it really matters. I want to thank Sea Grant and wish you a happy birthday. We've been close partners for a long time. Certainly your help on the Wisconsin Point restoration or helping us really comb through the fine print of our ordinances and making sure that we weren't in our own way when it came to development or plans in everyday policies, making sure that while we were forward facing, that we were really getting into the nitty gritty of what we were doing as a city on the municipal level. I just also want to say that today is very much a water day because in my day job, I am here so late because I work in Odana on the Bad River Reservation. And today we had a book club with Sea Grant. I work really closely with Ann Moser down in Madison. And she, with the Wisconsin Water Library, who is one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever met. So we schedule her in the afternoon. No disrespect if she's here. She really, really cares about water, and she really, really cares about kids' education and their relationship with the water. And today was particularly special because the book that we were discussing was The Water Walkers. And Anne convinced the author to come. And she talked a lot about engaging kids and the activities that she does with kids in classrooms, and really building perspective about how little fresh water is available for the trees and the birds and us and everything else that depends on the water. So it just felt very appropriate, again, with the really cruddy weather. I'm like, today is my day. So in my day job, I spend a lot of time talking about tribal sovereignty and making sure that we are always making good decisions so that tribal members can not only have their sovereignty affirmed, but that they can always practice traditional ways of hunting, fishing, and gathering. So I work, sorry for Gliffwick, but that work is just really heavy and very apparent today. So for everything that you do for Indigenous communities, Native and non-Native, it's just critically important. So I'll just say in Tlingit, we say Gunak Chish to say thank you. Let's try it together. Gunak Chish. In Ojibwe, we would say Miigwech. And in English, we'll say thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. Appreciate it.
That was great. Next, I'd like to ask Deanna Erickson to come up, the director of the Lake Superior National Estuary Research Reserve, fondly known as the Reserve.
Just make life easier. Oh man, so I was thinking about, I've been at the reserve since the reserve was designated. It was designated in 2010 and it started to staff up in 2011. And so I'm in the lucky position of inheriting all of the stories and some of them are like, I won't tell up here, of like what they went through and the parties that they had to get the reserve designated over the 8-ish years that they worked on it. But here's something that I really know is from all those stories, and from our very MOU that just makes us even exist. There's the most important organizations that built us up and hold us up and continually keep our support our efforts and expand upon our efforts and we get to support as well. So Sea Grant was one of those organizations. And so I think it's really just deserves a lot of credit when an organization looks and says, okay, they want to do more. It's kind of like us in some ways. And they see that that's more, not competition. I think that's really forward thinking. And we're really lucky to have just across the board partners like that who see that. And so, you know, I was thinking about what I wanted to say, and my mom is a wedding officiant, and I kind of had this whole like metaphor of like, well, we had an MOU. But that's not actually what I wanted to say. But something that's really been remarkable to me from the very beginning, when like Jean and I were like in the corner kind of, oh, well, Jean was in like this wall wasn't here. We had, I don't know, they were plastic walls. Like we had surplus furniture, like in these, it was a retail space. It was funny in here. You know, we would be sitting around the table, and one of the things that always struck me, even in those very early days, is how we were different but complementary. You know, that's what makes a good relationship. And you know, Sea Grant was thinking about how to drive the science that was needed. So are the reserves. That's something we think about too. We're all thinking about the places where we work, the communities that we work in, and what they actually need, because we are in public service together, right? But we also were different. The reserves are, you know, we're 16,000, the reserve is 16,000 acres along the St. Louis River estuary. And that's really like, that's, I mean, the coolest place ever to focus on, the headwaters of Lake Superior and the entire Great Lakes system. But it's also, you know, we're here in our corner, we kind of extend along Lake Superior shoreline in Wisconsin. That's part of our mission that was baked in through our designation process, other stories that came to me. But Sea Grant gets to have this awesome statewide perspective. And so the folks that share our office and share our community through Sea Grant bring that to us and help make us a part of it too. A lot of times they also bring expertise that the National Estuarine Research Reserves don't really have. Like, I am really good at talking to second graders, but I am not good at coastal engineering, you know? And so I probably am like less good at talking to second graders now. Actually, Luciana's working in the second grader realm. But you know, that complementary nature and the building upon each other and the supporting each other through things like the story Jim told about, you know, Hannah and I going out and putting our auto sampler at the mouth of Newton Creek and really trying to make that data useful and contribute to something greater that was needed. Jim took that and made it apply to the state, you know. So we do different things, but we help each other through the different things we do. And it's been like that since the first day I got here. Thanks to Jean, thanks to Marie, and now thanks to Natalie, and all of the folks that are down in Madison and around the state. So, you know, and it's in the future, I think, I don't see anything for us but just enduring partnership and continuing to do that. You know, sometimes there'll be a day where it's like, oh, I wish I knew how to do a communication thing. Oh, we have Marie and Sharon and people to help us. We have the amazing library that we can draw from. They've supported our education programs. They've listened to the research needs that we've asked for. And I think that'll continue together into the future. So, you know, I guess the last thing I put were like, you know, the NOAA organizations in the state. Coastal management is also part of our Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, also signed the MOU that made us exist. And we're kind of like a triangle, you know, triangles are stronger, building together and just being there for each other. And that's a really neat and very human thing for two like federally funded organizations. And it makes you feel very lucky to be a part of them and to have them in our community. And for 50 years nonetheless. So thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. I'm just smiling. This is lovely. It's been really great. Thanks. Next, we're going to hear from Joel Hoffman. Joel has a lot of title on his email. I'm going to read all of this because I don't want to leave anything out. So Joel Hoffman is the Chief Ecosystems Branch Acting Chief, Watersheds and Water Resources. Good, you're walking up here for this. Watersheds and Water Resources Branch, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Research and Development, Center for Computational Toxicology and Exposure, Great Lakes Toxicology and Ecology Division. Now you have to follow that introduction, but we're going to hear from Joel. He's with the EPA.
I never realized that those titles become such a burden to the rest of the scientific community. I've learned my lesson. I'm very happy to be here. On behalf of EPA's Office of Research and Development, from the Great Lakes Toxicology and Ecology Division, we want to say happy birthday. This is really special. Thank you to Jim and Moira to inviting me to be here, to join you on this momentous occasion. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and the Sea Grant staff celebrating. The Wisconsin Sea Grant folks, I've worked with nearly all of you over the years. Thank you for everything you've done. As an organization, as a group of dedicated scientists, professionals, resource managers, to protect our Great Lakes. And of course, Wisconsin has a special role. It gets 2 Great Lakes. But in setting that path forward, you really broaden the impact. I think Jim's presentation told that story well, that in learning how to protect Lake Michigan, how to protect Lake Superior, we're also helping to understand how to protect Lake Huron and Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and this other thing far to the east, it's oddly shaped and is okay, called Lake Champlain. You guys have accomplished so much in the past 50 years. It's really remarkable. Again and again and again, the program has really set the gold standard on how to protect our coastal natural resources and our coastal communities. I'm really excited to see what you're going to do in the next 50. I'm just young enough that if I live a really healthy life, I just might be here to see the next 50. So I have a goal. Like Wisconsin Sea Grant, EPA shares a 50-year history. We just had a 50th birthday a few years ago. EPA, of course, was founded in 1970. In the spirit of sharing, I thought it might be fun to kind of highlight some of the goals, the programs, and even the people that we share with the Wisconsin Sea Grant. Our facility is situated on the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin, although we're a federal facility. We take a lot of ownership in that state relationship. I'm wearing my Minnesota pride here, just to bother some of you. Of course, we face out onto Lake Superior. And so our laboratory has a special relationship with Wisconsin Sea Grant. And I'm happy to celebrate that relationship today. We share some very specific goals on how to protect our coastal ecosystems and our coastal communities. We're both very focused on improving healthy coastal ecosystems. Jim gave some great examples. We're both deeply committed to addressing sources of these forever chemicals, PFAS and PCBs, heavy metals like mercury that are, have their fate in our drinking water. They end up in our fish. They present a risk to the environment. They present a risk to our people. And we share that common commitment to addressing those risks to our coastal communities. We're both intensely interested in resilient communities, helping the communities plan, better cleanup projects, to better design ecological restoration for climate change, to help address coastal infrastructure projects so they don't just withstand the last storm, they last through the next storm, so that we are really prepared to address the future that's coming at us. We're also deeply invested in battling aquatic invasive species. This has been a long-term battle in the Great Lakes. It's one of the hard, long themes of ecological health in the Great Lakes. both committed to preventing new species, for better responses, for early detection. These are very important goals shared by our organizations. We also have shared some programs in the past. The one I love the story about, I think it's worth just revisiting for a second, is the really important work from the Fox River PCB work and eventually the Lake Michigan Mass Balance Program. This is a program in the early 80s. It was a joint venture with EPA and many academic organizations. Of course, Wisconsin folks played a key role in that. For those who don't know it or don't really understand the history, it really truly was a landmark effort, in part for all the reasons Jim described: incredible collaboration, great people, ambitious goals. And we figure out where all the PCBs are going and what are we going to do about it? And what you may not realize is that actually set the foundation that persists to today for understanding if we're meeting our benchmarks for getting PCBs out of Lake Michigan. That Lake Michigan Mass Balance Study is still the gold standard that sets the scientific basis for understanding if we're making the progress we think we should. It's a really incredible document and one of the great success stories in the Great Lakes for environmental management. We also now share our training program, and this has been an amazing experience for us. I hope it's been an amazing experience for you. We've now had five postdoctoral research associates training with our facility, a great opportunity to interact more with the faculty and the folks at Wisconsin Sea Grant. Really exciting. We've had summer interns now introduced from the campus, from the Wisconsin-Madison campus, coming to work with us. Really exciting stuff. It helps the EPA by bringing great ideas and great people into our organization. I like to think it helps Wisconsin Sea Grant mission because we're really focused on those common missions. Postdocs working on things like perfluorinated compounds, mercury accumulation in the Great Lakes, how to have better environmental testing and ecological health assessment for our environment. These are critical issues now and will be for the next 50 years. So in closing, thank you again for 50 years of impactful work to protect our coastal ecosystems and our coastal communities. On behalf of EPA, we're really looking forward to working alongside you for the next 50 years. Thank you.
All right, so you heard in Jim's talk about coastal engineering, how important it is a specialty that is for us. We have low lakes, now they're really high lakes. In our 50-year history, we've only had 3 coastal engineers. Gene Clark was our second coastal engineer. So he's gonna come up and tell us some stories from his time. He's a retired coastal engineer. He was based in the Lake Superior office, so I'm thrilled to see him again.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to kind of change what I was planning to talk about. So everybody's thanking Sea Grant. So thank you, Sea Grant, for hiring me and paying me. Thank you. 15 years at the end of my career. Thank you. Thank you for hiring a 50-year-old non-PhD. Thank you. So, but seriously, Jim asked me to talk a little bit about the extension side. You know, we do a lot of research, but the extension side works really with the stakeholders. And the question about how do we come up with a work plan leads right into what I had planned to talk just a little bit about. The 2 projects in my work plan that all 15 years of my career with Sea Grant I worked on, and I think they're the most successful. And I was lucky enough to have 2 river talks, one on the harbor corrosion project and one on the beneficial use of the dredge material. So how did I become involved with those? So I have to tell you a little story about when I was hired. Phil Keeler, with 30 years of Sea Grant, was in the Madison office, and he lamented not being able to work much on the Lake Superior. He had a couple of projects. When I was hired and we'd talk over coffee, he'd say, gee, I know there's got to be a lot of projects, a lot of work up there. So my first first big meeting with Jim when I was hired was in Madison. And I said, okay, Jim, what do you want me to do? You know, I was came from the consultant side where they said, we've got a problem. We're going to pay you, you know, use the expertise or whatever and fix it. Jim said, well, here's Phil's work plan that he's had and he modified it over the years. It was his ending work plan. He said, I'll take a look at it and see if any of those tasks or work plan elements you can take on. But you've got a different area of expertise in coastal engineering, even though it seems a small set of engineering, you've got a little bit different expertise. Which ones do we sunset? And then which ones do you want to put in there? I thought, well, this is great. He's paying me to tell him what I can do, you know, for him. But no, that's the way. So I said, so how do I do that? He said, well, take the first year of your program up there in Superior, because I was serving here all 15 years. And I had been working for the state of Minnesota with the office in the DeWitt Sites building, but I never worked with a port. I never worked with any of the Wisconsin agencies, and they were all the Minnesota ones. So I knew all the stakeholders in Minnesota and basically none of them in Wisconsin. It was kind of ironic. I only knew one of the Minnesota Sea Grant staff, Cindy Hagelin, but she asked me to do some talks when she was working with property owners of the erosion on the Lake Superior shoreline on the Minnesota side. And that's the work that I was doing for the state of Minnesota. So I gave those talks, but I really didn't know what Sea Grant did. So Jim said, spend a year or more out of this office and learn who your stakeholders are going to be and what their needs are, and how you can deliver science-based, non-advocacy information is how I kind of saw the mission of Sea Grant. And that was really easy to sell. That, you know, I had no agenda, but I was bringing science-based research information or published coastal engineering information to be a team player. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't the lead, I was a team player. And so I go back to the office and I'm opening the mail of there was a specialist here, by the way, but he's commercial business was his specialty. And he retired a week or two before Phil did or after. So Jim had two openings and put the coastal engineer up here so Sea Grant could be doing some coastal engineering up here. And so Jim said, you know, talk to whoever you can. So I'm going through the mail of the previous the specialist up here, and there was a notice of Duluth Superior HTAC meeting. I said, well, what's that? Harbor Technical Advisory Committee. Okay, well, I figured it must be referring to the business side of the harbor, because, well, this harbor's been here for how many years? They've got all the engineering figured out, the infrastructure figured out, and the dredging figured out, you know, that the Corps does that. So that's why I never heard of them. I never knew anybody from the port. So I see this and decide to go to the meeting because I saw, well, Harvey got this invitation, or not invitation, but I look and there's 45 people and I knew one, and it was Mike Peliquin. Those of you know knew Mike Peliquin from Minnesota, you know, great guy. And I knew him, I had worked with him a little bit on permitting in Minnesota. And we talked and he said, you know, we've got this dredging committee here and you ought to be on that. And he said, I said, I can't talk to you much about it, but there's a lot that's going to start up again. We hadn't been very active. He said, come to the next meeting, because I'm going to have the Corps of Engineers there and we're going to start talking about some problems we have. So I thought, hey, maybe I found a niche or one of the elements that might be, you know, my gold star, that I can do that up here. So I go to that meeting and I notice there's a Minnesota Sea Grant staff member, Jeff Gunderson, also on there. So I thought, well, you know, I wonder what he does. So I sat next to him and just started talking and said, you know, I'm going to be a partner and I'd like to come over and talk to you And I was waiting just for Mike Peliquin to give his summary of what the dredging team was doing it. And he said, we've got some major problems. And he brought the Army Corps of Engineers people from Detroit district there to talk about the Erie Pier issues. We've got Erie Pier, it's almost full and we don't know what to do with the sediment. And we want to start talking about the beneficial use of sediment. I thought, wow, my first 3 years after grad school was working with the Army Corps of Engineers research lab and dredge material use. You know, go figure, you know, and that was just that meeting at HVAC was 2 months after I came up here. And just it in my lap. And so I joined that. A couple of years later, Mike Peliquin moves offices over to Brainerd. I became the chairman of that committee. And so knowing the stakeholders and being that worked in my work plan, great. I thought this is going to be, I could never top this. Well, in that same meeting, when I'm sitting next to Jeff, small gentleman from the port comes up and they squeeze the presentation in because he just wanted to talk about it, alert people that the next meeting they were going to show some pictures. He talks about, we've got some problems with the port steel, you know, and we've got to do some repair work. We don't know what's going on. He calls another gentleman up, who I didn't know, and it was a commercial diver who worked at Crick and Ojard at the time, who told him that, you know, you've got problems and we've even got to repair some of that. And it was Chad Scott, EMI, and Jim Sherrill. Little did I know that those two, along with the Corps, were going to be 15-year partners, stakeholders in the Harbor Corrosion Project. And what the funniest part was, I didn't think I was going to do anything with it. You know, I heard the story, and when it was done, I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Steel doesn't corrode in fresh water. You know, maybe this consultant's trying to, you know, make some money on the side or something. You know, because I was familiar with the marine issues. Well, yeah, you got to put anodes, coatings, and even the Corps of Engineers said we've never heard of this in any ports. So what's so special about, you know, our port here? So I lean over to Jeff and say, you know, Jeff, do you know anything about this or Minnesota Sea Grant? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, about, you know, problems with this. He looks at me, and those of you who knew Jeff Gunderson looked at me and said, no, I don't. I'm a fish guy. And that was a specialty. And so, and so then he looks at me. He said, well, you're an engineer. You know, you ought to know about it. I said, Jeff, I have no clue. You know, and so, but what Jim Sherrill ended with his short little presentation, when he said, we're going to the legislature in Minnesota. We think we can get some funding to figure out what's going on, what's the solution, and how can we stop it? And but we don't know what kind of study we need to do, you know, and to go down there and get some justification. Anybody knows anything about putting together studies for something technical like this, please let us know. You know, we need some help. So then after the meeting, Jeff turns to me, said, you know, well, you don't know anything, I don't. But the Sea Grant program, we ought to be able to help them somehow spend their money. You know, and what he really meant was, right, you know, help them with the work plan and get the money. So Jeff and I got together the next week and started to brainstorm what could we do. And we thought, we don't know anything about the problem, what's causing it. They don't know. So let's get some experts in. And so we made some calls, found about 5 experts in steel, types of steel, stray current, which would be some microbiological because there were some growths on the steel, and just general properties of steel and infrastructure. Brought them in for 2 days, and Minnesota Sea Grant led it with Carl Richards because, you know, they had more staff, and the port authority was, you know, from Duluth side. But both Sea Grant programs helped pay to get these experts in, spend 1 day looking at the problem all around at what structures they could see, go to their hotel room and then come back and tell us, okay, so what, what's the problem and how do we fix it? Well, the experts were dumbfounded. I mean, they said, well, it could be this, but it could be that. And they really said, we've never seen it, so yeah, but we see it. I mean, they saw the holes, they saw the pitting because it was kind of low water, which is why dredging was so important, because we had to lighten ships to get built. And so they gave us studies that we could do or look at, and that helped Jim get $100,000 from state of Minnesota. The Army Corps of Engineers got $300,000 to do not simple, but to do studies and just to tell us what do we have out there. Chad had seen a few facilities. We did something like 50 to 55 different facilities and looked at what are the conditions? Is there corrosion on all of them, or is it only in certain spots? How about up and down? Is it the whole steel or only parts of it? It ended up being only the top 10 feet. Okay, so that kind of told us something that we didn't know. I started to see growths of some kind of slime or something growing on the steel that kind of wasn't typical, and it was only in the areas where the holes were seen. And so we did studies, we did, the reports, and that was all done the following year when the funding came. That set up the major stakeholders, the Army Corps of Engineers, new Sea Grant program, the ports, and consultant, the diver, Chad Scott, who then became AMI. Well, then the corrosion project had a lot to do with it, but also Ted Smith in a construction firm. And about 7 years into it, after we did the studies didn't tell us what was causing it, but it eliminated all the obvious things. It wasn't straight current. I thought it was probably the salt that when the DOT would plow snow, where do they put a lot of it? 21st Avenue West, underneath the can of worms, just piles of all the snow with the salt. Well, but it wasn't that, because it was all throughout the harbor, and that salt wouldn't make its way up, it'd make its way out. I initially thought maybe it was some of the barrels out there were oozing whatever was in there, and it was getting in the harbor, the girls. So we eliminated a lot, but the microbacteria issues, Minnesota, so we kind of changed the way that we approach that problem. Is that Minnesota Sea Grant and Dr. Hicks' lab was looking at that. They helped fund his work on looking at the bacteria, which eventually became one of the main causes of what's happening in the problem. And I focused with, okay, well, let's do the engineering side. We've got a lot of infrastructure that's already damaged. What can we do to at least repair that or stop the corrosion from occurring if we don't have to replace it, maybe buy some years? So that was the in situ issues. And what about those that we have to replace? Can we do something so they don't start to corrode, and have to be replaced again? So those studies, so that's where Ted and Chad really came into play. And we focused on that, as well as we didn't have a website at all. I asked our communication staff if our Sea Grant program would put that together so we could make that and put all of the reports that are on there, the work that we're doing, the fact sheet that you see, we developed, and about every 3 or 4 years, we updated it to what were we finding, what did the test show, what's coming next, and eventually, like the 5th version of that started to show the results. And now you hardly hear about it because they're being used, and they're either saving that steel that's still there, or when they're putting in new ones, like for grants, the state of Wisconsin won't allow them to put sheet that isn't coated because they want them to use that grant money for something else. So again, the stakeholders, being part of that stakeholders, taking science-based, non-advocacy information, and then kind of apply the Wisconsin idea too. actionable science, or take the research and then can we apply it to the real world? Those two projects, 15 years of my career, and the best ones, and the reason why I missed the funny part was I thought that, well, okay, we'll have these 5 experts come, that'll be my involvement, working with Minnesota Sea Grant. We put in some money, but they're going to find the answer and it's going to be done. So, I was looking at the dredging stuff and thought, that was it. And I was happy because I thought I had enough to do. And all of a sudden, the corrosion project just the more it went, the more there was more to do, but it was just more interesting because we were solving a problem that we then, and I helped identify other harbors in Lake Superior that had the problem too, and they didn't know it. The Corps said it was only here, but it wasn't only here. It was on Stockton Island, on the steel that the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore structures, in Bayfield, in Marquette, Michigan, and Houghton Hancock, terrible pitting that the marina just didn't even notice, and it's because they had the copper that we have the copper in our water and the bacteria attacking it too. So, same thing, working with stakeholders, having the science available, and if we didn't have it, we got it, and the rest is history. So,
Okay, we're going to hear from one more person, and Jean's remarks are a perfect lead in to hear from Alex Fry, Minnesota Sea Grant. He is the Research and Fellowship Coordinator. So you just heard about Jean's work with Minnesota Sea Grant. He is a great partner, Alex is, across the bridge, these 2 Sea Grant programs. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I'm filling in for John Downing tonight, so he gave me a few words here. So first off, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for that nice preview of Minnesota Wisconsin Sea Grant collaborations in the past. So as a new staff, it's really fun to learn about that history and kind of think forward to what my future might look like. So, so today I'm standing in for John Downing. John sincerely apologizes for its absence and sent me tonight with this message. So it is a great pleasure to offer heartfelt congratulations from Minnesota Sea Grant to the brilliant Wisconsin Sea Grant program on their 50th anniversary. Minnesota is a slightly younger program. We just turned 47, so we're relatively youthful. As I look through our annual reporting materials, it is clear to me that Wisconsin Sea Grant is far more than a collaborator, but much more like a sister program. We currently work hand in hand on any issue that touches on our joint concerns for the Lake Superior watershed, the estuary, the harbor, the shores, the beaches, and the big lake herself. A few of our current projects that we work on together, so I got a list here, so bear with me. We work on the shipboard science program, training teachers to teach students about the Great Lakes, work on a Manuman outreach and education toolkit, work on harbor and dredging and beneficial reuse programs and plans. We work together on the coastal hazards of Lake Superior Community of Practice, our joint work on the safe transport of hazardous materials to the region, joint work on the Center for Great Lakes Literacy website and resources, the Great Lakes Aquaculture Collaborative, Twin Ports Climate Conversations, and Twin Ports Freshwater Folk, strategic work with charter fishers on responses to COVID-19, the Great Lakes freshfishfinder.org resource, Park Point Beach Safety Initiatives, our joint RFP, which funds research of mutual benefit to both our states, is now supporting research on coastal hazards and toxic algae blooms, and many, many more things over the years. So that's just a small sampling of the wide range of partnerships that are present between our programs. Wisconsin Sea Grant was mentioned as a partner 41 times in our federal reporting last year alone. So that's probably as many projects as we have. So at Minnesota Sea Grant, we look to Wisconsin Sea Grant for collegiate collaboration, inspiration, and extremely valuable interaction. Together, we leverage our activities for mutual benefit of both our wonderful states. That's the end of the sentence. In closing, I want to offer our warmest congratulations to Jim Hurley for his stellar work and all the terrific staff of our most valuable partner in the mutual pursuit of water science at the service of coastal communities. So thank you.
No, I just. Yeah, eat, drink, have fun, continue stories. And make sure you buy Sharon's book, because I know you've been wanting to read it. Thank you all. This has just been great. And I just feel honored to be a part of this program and have so many great collaborators. So thanks so much.
Farewell.
Sure.